You're listening to the Four Phase Cycle podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of ZESTY Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the four phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hello, hello, hello. It is Alex here, and I am coming in for a story time. So I hope that you're ready. And this is going to be essentially 4 different parts, but it's going to be one long story because what I'm going to be describing here is my relationship with supplements over the years. Now, we've alluded to this off and on. And obviously, you're aware that over the years, Megan and I have both gone through lots of iterations of our health journey and what that really looked like. And so, one of the things that I realized I wanted to go into a little bit more is how something as kind of foundational as supplements, as viewed by society, right? This is different than what's the actual reality, right? However, in society, we hang our hat on supplements a lot, the same way that we view medications, right? A lot of times, Megan and I refer to pill for an ill is kind of how the conventional medicine community has gone. And then even within the functional, a lot of that was just laterally applied to supplements. And supplements are really cool because you'll hear as part of my story, I'll dig more into this, is that once you realize the power of having multiple choices and what that does for your state to know that you have choices and that you're not just stuck with, a limited amount of options for healing, it becomes very, very exciting. And the deal is that over time, though, that morphs because really, as you've heard us say, there's a lot more to the story. However, that is a journey that we all go on. However, I'd like to shorten the journey for as many people as possible because a lot of what you'll hear me talk about within this 4-part series is how much that navigating that was a struggle and where I got hung up. And those things, while the journey unfolds for each of us individually, the sidestepping of potholes can absolutely be done. So, really, that's my goal, to really open that up for you and help you navigate whatever is going on for you to really begin to see, what is applicable to you, what do you want to keep doing, and what maybe are you ready to let go of, right? So, this is going to be part 1. And part 1 starts with me early on in my journey with having health problems. So many of you have heard parts of my story there, but essentially by the time I got to college, and I did have period problems and that kind of stuff even before then, but I was able to hang with it. But it wasn't until I got to college that it really started to get ratcheted up. And when I got to college, I actually remember breaking out from eating the food in college, like breaking out in this whole body rash, and having the stress, having the alcohol consumption that comes with college, having the food, having the navigation of new people and living situations and being on your own and all of that. That process, I internalized a lot of it, but there was definitely some stress there that I hadn't really ever dealt with. And so as I made that leap, I think there was a lot of straws getting put on the camel's back until really by the time halfway through my freshman year, that is when I started to have very significant pelvic pain, enough where I was starting to notice how painful it was just going to the restroom, how painful it was to sit, which is a problem because I was a piano major. At that point I was practicing 8 to 10 hours a day because that's how you that's the studying, right? And in addition to the classes and your sitting and all of that, so I worked really hard and I was a good student, right? And so a lot of that involves sitting and being in a certain position, and it just got more and more uncomfortable over time. And within a couple months to a year was when I started experiencing really not being able to wear certain clothes. Like I couldn't wear jeans anymore. I couldn't wear anything with a waistband that cut into my skin in any significant way. The it wasn't just internal pain, it was all the time, and the skin everywhere was so sensitive that basically anything, I stopped riding bikes. That was something that I really liked to do. Or when I'd go to the gym, I'd get on the stationary bike or whatever. I stopped doing that. I got different types of chairs, or like different seats that are kind of like donut holes, right? And so this became rapidly incredibly disruptive, as you can imagine, being a freshman in college and everyone's like out doing their thing. And I'm basically thinking, what clothes can I still wear that I'm not in excruciating pain in? Or how do I sit? Or what is it going to be like when I go use the restroom next time? And that pain that I feel is going to last for 2 hours after that. Really, I was even doing things like trying not to drink water or liquids so that I wouldn't have to use the restroom, right? Because I had so much bladder pain and things. And it became all consuming. Now, as this was all happening, I grew up in a family that has a lot of doctors in our lineage. And along with that, I think globally as a society, we really have been focusing on authority figures, right? And all of that. And so the conventional medical community, in my mind, was the end all be all. That's what I learned from my parents, and that is the kind of viewpoint and belief system I held. And so I, went to the first one I could think of, which was the college campus MD. And I went multiple times, and I got some ibuprofen. I got told to take Tylenol. I got some topical lidocaine, which is a numbing. It's kind of like the stuff that they use for your teeth when you're getting teeth drilled, and things like that. And then it was a fairly rapid transition over to, well, most people with any sort of pelvic issues and period issues get birth control. And so that was my first foray into birth control and having that discussion. And even from the get go, it wasn't really something I wanted to do. It just didn't jive with me. And it's interesting because I actually, now with the understanding of birth control, and I've talked about that a lot on the podcast, of course, there are things now that I think about it. But even then, it was just more of a gut feeling. And I didn't see how it could help the entire picture. But I didn't have anything else, right? So I didn't know that that was just kind of an internal inkling that I had. And the guy sitting there that was supposed to, he's the authority, right? He's the expert. And so I'm like, all right, that's fine. And then I started going to other doctors. I went to the OB-GYN. Then I drove home where my parents lived, went to one there because my mom was like, well, I like mine, right? And it was all kind of the same thing. Now, some of them would run some labs, some of them would just listen to the story. And overall, it was the same stuff: ibuprofen, Tylenol, and birth control. And then over time, as I went, and I was getting more and more frustrated, so I can't say I was always a lovely patient to deal with, and I take responsibility for that. But as I would describe how frustrated I was at that, then understandably, people would attempt to react. And so the thing that they were reacting with actually caused me to be even angrier. So they were like, "Well, it sounds like you're frustrated and you're unhappy with what's going on. How about an antidepressant?" Which now, as an actual pain doctor, right? Went through med school and residency and fellowship to be interventional pain trained. Now with that, the role of SSRIs and SNRIs, especially things like duloxetine, I do think that there's a role in the toolkit depending on what is happening. However, now that's a whole separate subject that I could talk on for hours. Um, however, at the time, because I didn't understand that chronic pain was a disease of the central nervous system, right? I was still just like, here's a problem I'm having. Because that I didn't have the understanding, I was deeply insulted. That was my interpretation of it. And I actually don't believe that they were coming at it from the chronic pain perspective. They were just like, I don't know how else to help this girl. And how do I get her to, leave and not be angry at me? And so that was a logical choice. Now I don't begrudge them that, but at the time, I was very, very hurt by that whole concept of essentially I already had multiple people being like, well, if that stuff's not working, are you sure it's not in your head? And then to keep going to get other opinions and be told that, oh, here's an antidepressant, which to me confirmed that they believed it was in my head, really sent me into the deep end. So that's what was happening overall at that portion of time. And at this point, then that became years, right? That was college, and, and that was what I was living. Now, at some point, then throughout college, as you can imagine from knowing me and listening to the podcast, and I feel like anyone who listens to the podcast like really knows Megan and I because we share so much on here and go so much in depth of our thoughts. However, so as you can imagine, me sitting there not getting answers, like my personality is to be like, hold on, I'm going to figure this out, right? And so that's how I started. And really that led me to change and realize I wanted to become a pain doctor for women, which is exactly what I ended up doing. And then it started me on that. Now I did finish out being a piano performance major, and then did some summer classes and things like that before going to medical school. But in addition to getting kind of the bug to do that, underneath the surface, I was like, I know that I can't enter this new career with the same thinking that they all have, because the reason I wanted to become an MD is because I didn't feel like I was being treated in the way that I wanted to be treated. And I'm like, if I'm having a hard time finding this, I started going online back, and this is back when like forums were a thing, right? Because social media wasn't as much around. Like there was Facebook, but it wasn't used the way it was now, right? And so I'd be looking on forums, and there's a whole bunch of people saying the same thing. I mean, you see that now still. And I thought, man, there's got to be someone who's going to be better equipped at doing this. But I kind of, knew, I'm like, well, you can't take the same system and not have it work the same way, right? Like you have to modify it somehow. So this is where I thought, well, I will go out and I will explore other options because there has to be other things available. And you're probably sensing a theme here already from listening to this, because that's how my brain works, right? I'm like, there's answers out there, they just need to be found. And because of that, I started exploring other modalities of treatment. I will say I had a little bit of a leg up on this because being born in Russia and my whole family being, like my whole family, extended family is Russian, there's a lot of within the culture reverence for things like herbs and teas and all of those that you hear us talking about. So part of that for me it was brought culturally, and because I grew up with that, and that was just straight up because there wasn't medicine around, right? Like what around the time I was born was when the Soviet Union was coming to an end, and so and before that, the Russian culture is so old. Some of these bigger cities are like 900 years old. There's just lots and lots of heritage there with healers and medicine women and all of that, right? Shamans. And I had a little bit of that growing up, and it was enough that even though really the even within my family at the time, it was like, well, now we have conventional medicine. But there was always the option of like, what do you do? So I'll give you an example. When we know colds are caused by viruses, right? And so unless there's another bacterial issue going on because of the virus, then antibiotics don't apply. So this all is obvious, right? And sometimes in situations like that, what people are going to the doctor for is like, I know that you're not going to fix it, but like, how do I get through the symptoms, right? And sometimes those options are limited as well. Whereas in my family, what I grew up with was when there isn't something like there isn't an antibiotic to take and you're going to just ride out the symptoms, all of the other herbal things and the things that my mom did, like the facial steam baths for colds, like we have that on our blog, right? I grew up with that kind of stuff. Even she make like boiled potatoes, and then the leftover water would be the steam, and you'd put herbs in it, right? So though that's how it was used. So it was like when you didn't have something conventional to do, then you had the option to do something more traditional. And I think it's because of that then that I was like, well, there's got to be other stuff. I had no idea just how much. I mean, I still think that Megan and I haven't topped the surface, which is why I laugh a little bit when I feel like I used to say like I've tried everything, because I'm like I've been actually practicing this for years and years and I still haven't found everything. So, but still there was that sense of there's more out there. I'm pretty sure I can find answers. And so I started going to other practitioners, and it was everyone from like chiropractors that were local to me to I even drove to, my mom found this woman that was like, it was an Amish community and she was a healer and she did muscle testing for herbs and she would recommend teas and stuff, right? And so at this point, years in, and I was just getting worse. And really, at that point, by the time I finished college, the pain, as it can sometimes happen, generalized, right? So that pain signal, once it got turned on, then my central nervous system generalized and it became all over. So it wasn't just my pelvis, it was everything. So all clothes, all movement, was just all the time in pain. And so really, it can sound like, wow, that's you're just kind of being extreme, driving to different places and just testing it out. And I didn't even know what I thought about muscle testing, but really, I can say at that point, I would, if someone had been like, I don't know, pour gasoline on yourself, light yourself on fire, and then heal from that, you'll be good. I would have done it. Like that's how that's how miserable and disempowered I was, and just sitting in that and being like, I don't even know what to do, drove me insane. So I was really willing to do anything to heal. But because I had all of these different different options, and I was exploring a lot, what happened actually was that I got to be exposed to many different concepts across the board, and some of them didn't stick around. There are some things that, I didn't enjoy, and some of the things have stuck around. But what it did was open my eyes to just how many other options are there. And one of the things that really stood out to me was plant medicine, and herbal supplements, teas, and even elixirs. Elixirs came a little bit later for me personally, like in the way that Megan and I developed them. But the concepts, that's where I got the seeds for those ideas that would become what you see here today and what we do and what we recommend, right? And this concept of herbs functioning as options for a toolkit was born in this period of my life. And from here, there was some problems actually, because this became the foundation for the supplement graveyard. So if you watch some of our free series and things like that, as we have debuted them, we talk about what kind of health seekers are out there, and one of them is the supplement graveyard. And that really is, as much as we're like haha, but really that was me. That's why we have that as an archetype for how some people react to looking for answers, and that was exactly what I did. Right? So I became kind of obsessed with herbs and different formulation of supplements, and I would try any and all of it. Now this caused lots of problems. We can talk about how I needed to get a CAT scan to rule out ovarian cancer because of that later on, right? That it wasn't without drawbacks. And really a lot of, and I'll talk about this in part two, really how did that lead me to be more intentional about the supplementation? Well, the reason I had to become more intentional was because I actually had a couple of years where I just chased down the next shiny thing, right? Now, is there some good that came out of it? Yeah, I would say so, because now, as we work with women, we see this play out a lot. That's where people are in men. It could be right because they go from not having options to realizing that there are some, and then there's a whole bunch of them actually, and you just kind of go nuts looking at them. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with the fact that any of us do that. But it does have its downsides. So I spent a lot of, I worked very hard in college running a piano studio, and I worked at a restaurant, and I was participating in piano competitions, which there's a whole piano competition scene where you can get paid for winning. Right, so like the first three spots will win, and sometimes they're a couple of $1,000s. Right, so in college I was working part time when doing all of these things and participating in these competitions. And so I was generating cash, and I was literally just putting it back out into buying herbs and supplements and doing it. But I didn't have any sort of strategy for it. So it really was some of the shiny syndrome things. And I would read about something, and because I was prepping for med school, I'd go look it up in PubMed, and I'd read all about it, and I'd get all jazzed. And then because I didn't really understand what my body was doing, I didn't understand the problems, I didn't understand how each individual supplement and herb was impacting what I actually had going on under the hood. I'd do it for a while, and then 2 periods later, it's like I'd be back in bed having super terrible cramps and a lot of pain again. I'd be like, oh, but last month was so good when I started this thing. Now it's not working. Why isn't this working? And I'd throw it all out and start all over. So that's how I got the supplement graveyard, because I really, a lot of the stuff was good, and this is where I'm going to go next. A lot of stuff I was using was actually good stuff and it was helpful. However, because I was doing it willy nilly and I didn't I didn't have the, Megan has talked about this for the mold, right? She kept jumping protocols. It's not because the protocols weren't working, it's because she was so much in the second guessing of it and confused about the general picture that the supplements had no place to land. And that was the same thing here. I didn't have any sort of system or understanding. I was just sort of applying them. And then when it didn't pan out, then I would just go on to the next thing, right? And so that was my experience. Now, that set me up for what we're going to talk about part two. And so in part two, I had to become strategic and intentional at some point and begin to make choices from a place of greater understanding, and especially understanding what was happening under the hood physically. That's not going to be the end of the story, and there's a reason there's a four-part series, because there was still some definite problems with that as well. I had to go on to the next stage and the stage after that, but at least, this area where I was really exploring and working on things and learning about everything, that part was very important. And the other good thing that happened as an outflow of that is really because I had personal experience with a lot of the things that now people come in with. I can speak to a lot of it and I know exactly what they're talking about. I'm like, oh, you took that thing and this happened? Yeah, me too. Right? Like, I actually lived it all. And not everything, of course, but I managed to do a lot. And because of that, of course, that gives me a different level of understanding. The last podcast episode I released with about the trauma, that still applies here, so I'm not saying that's a necessary part of the equation, but really for this, it did lead me to a greater understanding of this. Now, some of the things then, because of that, some of the things that I found during this time period have stuck around, and they've stuck around in a really big way, and so I'm going to be sharing that. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to cover supplements, actually, and I should have said this in the beginning of the podcast episode, and I'll remind you in each subsequent one, is that Full Script is doing a Cyber Monday 20% off extra. And so I'm going to be sharing the link here. If you're already signed up with us, awesome. You can get the other 20%. And if you're not, then this would be a good time. And this is where you're going to hear why certain things we have in our full script is because they've literally lasted in our toolkits. And like for me personally, some of this stuff has stuck around for that long. And so from this era of my life, some of the realizations that I had about the power of herbal supplements was incredibly, incredibly, incredibly powerful. And that kind of stuff is still playing out, right? So it's all good from that standpoint, right? It's really whatever journey we go on, we get the nuggets if we choose to find them for whatever it is. But not everything lasted. And that's really my point, in that sometimes in the exploration stage, some of the stuff we're going to let go of, right? And we're going to not take that with us into stage two, and you'll hear that in the part two of the story. But some of it I really did discover a lot, right? For example, one of the first things I discovered, and we still talk about it to this day, is the role of using ginger, and literally that's in her name. That's how important this has been. Ginger and turmeric, and the other herbs that can help support inflammation, right? Because in this area of my life, when I was addressing what I now know were endometriosis symptoms, which is an inflammatory condition, I still hadn't been diagnosed with celiac disease. That's an inflammatory, there are inflammatory components, and chronic pain, which has inflammatory components. All of that there, I began to learn about it, and of course my understanding evolved. But those tools debuted in my life at that time period, and that's how long they've stuck around, and they've become important enough that when Megan and I were sitting to name our business, we knew we wanted to have ginger in there. And obviously it's also funny because she has red hair. And so it all just kind of worked out, but we were like, what are the tools that we really love? And that was one thing that really easily stood out to us, right? So that's why things like the Inflammate Complete, that has things like ginger and turmeric, that's in our full script. When you look at the supplements that we have in our formulary, that's how we came to those. That's how, we vetted those, and over time they have become staples inside the discussion that we have. And it dates back to all the way back there when I was just straight up trying and learning and reading and experiencing all of it for myself. Okay. That's also true of things like nettle, right? Nettle tea, and there's nettle tinctures as well. And that kind of stuff, because the tea is just you can buy it at the store. The tincture is a full script thing. And really, that was nettle became when I learned about nutrient density and the importance of minerals for biochemical reactions. That was one that stuck around, and you still see us talking about that today, right? When I think of if someone woke me up dead in the middle of the night and were like, hey, what are some of the tools that you like for inflammation? I would immediately be like ginger, turmeric, tart cherry concentrate, cold exposure at the end of your shower, right? Or, cryotherapy if you're actually going to go to something. And so there are some foundational things, and that'll, there are foundational things that I will list because of how long they've been around and how powerfully they can be used. And so, because they have stood the test of time for me, it really, the exploration stage of this phase did introduce me to some things that are years and years and years and years later are still actively in my toolkit, and I am using them consistently throughout the time. There's also things like cruciferous veggies that I realized were really, really powerful at the time. Now, over the years, I actually realized just how much, but even back then, I had discovered things like, sprouts, and then people create sprout supplements, right? So pH quintessence, which we have in full script as well, is one of those. And so as over time, even though the look of them has changed, because I've used everything from dim to sulforaphane and all that kind of stuff, and I'll talk about that in future parts about this specifically. But over time, that is has informed what we use. There was a lot of stuff that didn't survive, right? And that was some of the more isolated compounds. And that's because I think a lot of times people end up with like 30 different supplements because everything is working singularly. Whereas for Megan and I, we like to have a toolkit where how can each component of the toolkit cross cover and work in different ways and support different systems. And this will be a big part of part 2 of getting more intentional and strategic about what we're using, right? But a lot of that stuff did not stick around for that reason, because I then realized, wow, I'm spending a lot of my hard-earned money on these things that I'm not getting the most out of, and therefore they didn't survive that part of in that phase of my life. But that is not to say that they don't make their debut in other ways, because you've heard me talk about nutrient density. Super important. Mitochondrial function, biochemical reactions, creation of hormones and neurotransmitters. I mean, we need parts. We need things to make something. It's not from scratch, or it's getting broken down from your body and used, right? And so the nutrient density component remained, but the strategy and the way that it was used really transformed. So that really takes us to part 2 of the story. So keep an eye out for that. They'll be out shortly. In the meantime, this Cyber Monday deal, if you buy supplements at all, for a while I was like, oh, I'd rather just go to the store and get supplements. This was even up until a couple of years ago. And Megan was like, no, but really, their shipping is super fast and they're way cheaper on there, and they have deals like this all the time. And she finally got me using it. And I'm a converter. I buy almost nothing at the stores because it's marked up there, and then like our full script has a standing 15% off once you're part of it, right? And because of that, I just no longer buy things unless I'm like really in a pinch and on vacation and like ran out of magnesium or something that I want. But that's few and far between these days, anywho, as you'll hear in parts 3 and 4. So check that out. The link is in the show notes, but it's zestyginger.com/zesty full script. Is that all one word? And then full script is FULL script. So full script. All right, so that is part 1. Check out the full script deal. This is going to be starting on Monday, but you can start getting geared up for it. Check out what's in there. You can see our entire formulary there, and just to take a look compared to what you've been paying for supplements other places, and make some decisions around that. It's going to be going on for 4 days, so you have some time to look it over and see what you think. Alrighty, so I'll be back for part 2, and I hope that you're having a wonderful day.
Thanks for coming out to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare, and we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads, and we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting-edge information.
If you found these podclasses helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.